This is Strike the Sun MD, and I want to do a review for Taxi Driver. Wrote some notes to give a brief synopsis to try to keep this in a logical order and reasonably structured. I would like to use clips. I think that would make these more watchable than watching me in my robe on my floor next to my door. But all the same, Taxi Driver came out in 1976, directed by Martin Scorsese, and the lead role goes to Robert DeNiro, who plays Travis Bickle, a 26-year-old ex-Marine, former Vietnam vet. He was a Vietnam vet who's now got insomnia as he drives around the streets of dirty, grimy, seedy New York and sees all kinds of distasteful characters: pimps, drug dealers, criminals, prostitutes, patrons of all of the above, and he can't sleep because of it, and because of what he's seen in Vietnam, presumably. So he gets a job during the night, because he figures if he's gonna drive around, he might as well be a taxi driver to get paid for it. And excuse me for that, the only good bright side he sees is Betsy, who is a worker for a political campaign for Senator running for President Charles Palantine. He becomes fixated on her and goes in offering his assistance to volunteer hoping to get a date with Betsy, which he does. And shortly after that, he gives a ride to Charles Palantine himself and his aides, which I cannot imagine ever happening in the modern day. I think presidential candidates now want to be far removed from the common people. Anyway, and I just can't see it. I would imagine they'd have a lot more security and they'd be on their tour bus, not in a taxi. Palantine talks to him about what he'd like to see done, and Travis Bickle gives this disturbing long comment about the horrifying things he sees on the streets, and Palantine tries to reassure him. Shortly after, of course, a 12-year-old prostitute, Iris, played by Jodie Foster, is running away from Harvey Keitel's Sport, or Easy, or Matthew, who is the pimp of this underage young girl, who corrals her out and drops a 20 in Travis Bickle's front passenger side window to let him know, don't worry about it, it's nothing. Travis sees this and the wheels start churning. He goes on a second date with Betsy, and things go awry because he brings her to the movies, which is a standard date to go on with someone you're interested in, maybe even early on. But because of his isolation, his inability to relate to others, he brings her to a dirty film, which is just not normal. He sees nothing wrong with it, of course. She cuts off contact with him because she's disgusted, and he doesn't understand, so he becomes clingy and desperate and possessive in a way. He goes to confront her at the headquarters, and he gets kicked out. She's not having any of it. He gets kicked out by her coworker that seems to have something for her as well. Then he takes a new patron, played by Martin Scorsese, who wants him to spy on help him spy on his wife who's cheating on him with a black man. And he admits that his plan is to kill her now that he has another witness to her adultery. And that is when the wheels start churning for Travis. He's already isolated and alienated and alone and lonely and depressed and disgusted by everything he sees, and now he hears this and he sees this and he's seen everything, and he's still looking at that 20 that was dropped in his lap, essentially. He has to go talk to Wizard, who is played by Peter Boyle. They're in a diner, and that's another fantastic scene, but Peter tries to reassure him that he's going to be okay, even though Travis is telling him, I'm having a lot of really bad thoughts, and I want to do something. And while Peter Boyle's character, Wizard, tries to reassure him he's going to be okay, he's seen a lot in his 17 years, the wheels are turning. Travis Bickle has decided Charles Palantine must die. Political assassination is how I will effect change in this horrifying, dreadful city. I won't go any further into what happens. That's not quite halfway, but I think that's really where he's sort of a ticking time bomb anyway, but I think that's really where the gears shift, and it goes from a character study about a lonely man to a desperate man who's so isolated despite being in one of the most populous cities in America, in the world, densely populated. He can't relate to anybody, and it's a fantastic character study, I think. I'd like to talk about 3 particular scenes that I think, or 4 scenes that I think do this movie justice for it being a classic of American cinema. The point after the second date, you can see my Chinese Skippy peanut butter. Anyway, and he gets really desperate. Before he goes to the headquarters for the Palantine campaign, he makes a phone call to Betsy, and he's sent flowers, and he's tried to plead with her and everything, and it's just, she's not having any of it. While he's talking to her on the phone, the camera pans away from him and goes to the hallway, showing, I think, while this guy does some horrifying things in the movie, and we are following him, I think that shows, like, the way he's responding to everything around him is grotesque, and we can follow him to understand him and what he's going through, but we can't justify him in his beliefs or actions. We can only try to empathize with him to understand him. But once he starts taking it too far, we have to look away. Not so much to say, oh, you're a lost cause, but just to take a moment to realize there's something wrong. Because we don't quite leave him, we just look away. And that's, I think, a really powerful scene, that small moment. It's an amazing piece of direction. Another great piece of direction that shows his isolation, there are so many things in this movie, but there's a point, I believe the first time that he talks to Wizard and all these other cabbies, that he's late to the party, essentially. One of them asks him how he is, and he doesn't know how to respond to it. And they ask him again, like, how are you? And he tells this terrifying story, like really gruesome story about a sort of a stick-up with a guy with a knife in this black neighborhood and all these black patrons who are dressed like pimps. I assume they were pimps, but maybe they were just well-dressed, I'm not really sure. Given this movie, none of the characters are really good. Maybe Betsy, there's nothing distinctly wrong with her, I think, in terms of her being a bad person in any way. But he tells this story, and they all about this thing that happened to him, apparently, in this black neighborhood. All the black patrons stare, and then the cabbies kind of go along with their business and keep talking to each other, and Travis pours this salt, a ton of salt, into his water, and he's fixated on it. He keeps staring at it and the camera focuses on it for a while the other guys are talking. Like, he's so far removed from these people and from his surroundings. Like, he just has no social grace whatsoever, and he has no ability to relate to these people. I think that's really amazing. Of course, he's constantly talking to himself, with the, I believe, improvised scene, you talking to me, once he's decided to take action and start buying weapons and preparing himself for this assassination attempt, which of course he also plans to help Iris out of her situation. That is another disturbing moment. It was just so desperate and lonely, and he needs help. And of course the ending leaves a very ambiguous, though I think it is pointed in a certain direction, of him being a ticking time bomb. He drops off Betsy and sort of smiles at her when she tries to pay the fare, and he just smiles and drives off. And you have the leitmotif, that wonderful slow jazz piece playing, and while he's driving off, he looks in the rearview mirror and he sees something, and he jerks around, which lets you know that despite the lesson he could have learned in this movie, he's not a changed man. He's still a ticking time bomb. The world, he hasn't changed, and the world hasn't changed. We've merely observed this world he's in. And yeah, it is a wonderful film by Scorsese. I think the great part about it, like I mentioned with the phone call part, is that unlike, for example, Joker, about another alienated young man, I don't know if he's supposed to be young in that movie, but unlike Arthur Fleck, unlike Travis Bickle, is directly antagonized by every aspect of society. And in the end, he is made to seem justified by his actions, or his actions are made to be justified by the movie and what we've seen of the world he lives in. Travis Bickle, what we see in New York in the 70s is awful, but nothing directly antagonizes him, so he's not justified in his actions. We are horrified by everything he does, even though he ends up doing good and gets praised for it. What he does is still horrifying, and he is praised, but he's still a ticking time bomb with that ambiguous ending. And that's why this movie is better. Infinitely better. And yeah, thank you. Have a good day.